At 65, Martha stopped begging to be seen. After her husband died, she opened her home to her son and daughter-in-law, thinking love meant making room. But little by little, her kitchen, her time, her money, and even her memories were rearranged around everyone else's needs. So Martha did not explode. She did not play the victim. She locked. One door opened another life, and quietly taught her family that love without boundaries is not kindness, it is erasure. The kitchen clock clicked with a dry, rhythmic snap that always felt louder after 5 in the evening. Martha stood by the sink, her hands immersed in lukewarm water, watching the grease from the pot dissolve into small, iridescent rings. Upstairs, the heavy, rhythmic thud of her son Julian's boots vibrated through the floorboards. He was pacing, probably on another conference call, his voice a low, gravelly drone that had become the background music of her late 60s. It had been 14 months since Arthur died. The house, a sprawling, shingled colonial in upstate New York, had felt too large for one person, so when Julian and his wife Clara mentioned their cramped apartment and the soaring costs of childcare for toddlers, the arrangement had seemed natural. Win-win, they called it. But lately, Martha felt less like a matriarch and more like an old coat left in the hallway, useful when the weather turned otherwise forgotten. Clara entered, her phone wedged between her shoulder and ear, carrying 3 canvas bags of high-end organic groceries. She dumped them on the island right over Martha's half-read library book. Without looking up, Clara gestured toward the stove. "Hey, Ma, we're doing that salmon tonight. Could you prep the asparagus? Julian's stressed about the Q3 numbers." Martha wiped her hands on her apron. The book's spine was creased under a bag of heirloom tomatoes. "I was actually planning to finish that chapter before dark," Martha said, her voice soft, almost experimental. Clara didn't hear. She was already typing on her laptop, her thumb flying across the trackpad. "Oh, and we might need you to watch Leo an hour early tomorrow. The nanny wants a raise we can't afford, and my presentation is at 9. Martha looked at the asparagus. It was thick, green, and cold. She felt a familiar, dull ache in her lower back, not from injury, but from the weight of agreements she had never actually signed. The shift happened by degrees, so subtle that Martha blamed her own forgetfulness at first. It started with the spice rack, her tarragon and cumin replaced by Clara's imported matcha powders and prebiotic supplements. Then, the framed watercolor of Cape Cod that Arthur had bought her for their 30th anniversary was moved to the dark hallway near the pantry. In its place hung a large, minimalist whiteboard tracking Leo's nap schedules and Julian's travel itineraries. "It just streamlines the space, Mom," Julian explained the next morning, pouring cold brew from a subscription box into his travel mug. He looked tired, the skin beneath his eyes bruised with corporate fatigue. He was 34, but he carried his shoulders like a man twice his age. "The house needs to work for all of us now. Efficiency is survival right now." Martha sat at the small breakfast table, her hands cupped around a mug of plain black coffee. She looked at her living room where Leo's plastic blocks had colonized the Persian rug. "This house used to work differently," she murmured. "Well, times change," Julian said, kissing the top of her head absent-mindedly as he checked his watch. "Did you manage to call the plumber about the water pressure? Clara says it's affecting her morning routine." Martha didn't answer right away. She watched a sparrow land on the windowsill outside, its feathers ruffled against the morning damp. The plumber's bill would likely go on her credit card, just like the groceries from last Tuesday, under the unspoken assumption that her pension was a communal well. "I'll think about it," Martha said. Julian paused his hand on the doorknob, confused by the lack of immediate compliance, but his phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He vanished into the garage, leaving the door clicking shut behind him. By November, the basement had become Julian's executive suite. Martha's sewing machine and her boxes of old family photo albums had been neatly stacked in the damp corner behind the water heater to make room for an ergonomic standing desk and dual monitors. "We needed the light down here for my Zoom calls," Clara said that afternoon, her tone perfectly pleasant, entirely devoid of malice. She was organizing Martha's pantry, moving the baking flour to the highest shelf where Martha could barely reach it. "It's just temporary until we figure out the market." Martha stood in the doorway of her own kitchen, feeling like a ghost, watching living people move her furniture. She realized then that they didn't hate her. They simply didn't see her. To them, she was an infrastructure project, a provider of square footage childcare and silent stability. That night, after the house grew quiet and the television downstairs finally clicked off, Martha walked into her master bedroom. It was the only room left unchanged. Arthur's old flannel shirt still hung on the back of the closet door, faint with the scent of cedar and pine. She walked to the door, looked at the bare brass hardware, and reached into her pocket. She had gone to the hardware store during her afternoon walk while Leo was napping under Clara's watch. With a small screwdriver, she carefully installed a sturdy, heavy-duty deadbolt. When the metal clicked into place, the sound was surprisingly loud in the quiet house. She turned the key, testing it. The lock held. For the first time in 6 months, Martha took a deep, full breath, feeling the cool air reach the very bottom of her lungs. She sat on her bed, the key heavy in her palm, listening to the wind scrape the oak branches against the roof. The following Monday, Clara tapped on Martha's bedroom door at 7 in the morning. "Ma, Julian left early and I've got a breakfast meeting. Can you take Leo?" Martha unlocked the door and opened it just a few inches. She was dressed in her sturdy canvas trousers and a wool cardigan, her silver hair pinned back neatly. She wasn't holding an apron. She was holding a small leather notebook. "I can't today, Clara." Martha said, her voice steady and light. "I have my regional botanical society meeting at 8, followed by a local historical society luncheon." Clara blinked, her hand hovering in the air. "But the nanny isn't here until 10. I can't reschedule this. It's with the regional director." "That sounds important," Martha said kindly, stepping past her into the hallway. "You should probably call Julian to see if he can log on late, or perhaps call the backup agency." "Mom, you're always home on Mondays," Clara said, a note of genuine panic rising in her voice. "Since when do you do botany?" "Since today." Martha smiled, picking up her car keys from the counter. She had already moved her personal grocery items into a small, separate mini-fridge she'd quietly installed in her bedroom closet over the weekend. "There's coffee in the pot. I'll be back around 5. As Martha drove down the gravel driveway, she looked in her rearview mirror. Clara was standing on the porch, holding Leo on her hip, while staring at her phone with an expression of profound bewilderment. The sun was breaking through the November gray, casting long, sharp shadows across the lawn. Martha turned on the radio, tuned it to a classical station she hadn't listened to in a year, and drove toward the highway. Dear Quiet Revenge community, we want to sincerely thank everyone who spends time with our stories. This channel was created for people who still value emotional storytelling. Life lessons, family bonds, and the quiet strength people carry through difficult times. We believe in being honest with our audience. Tools may help support parts of the production process, but every story is still thoughtfully selected, edited, checked, and prepared by real people who care deeply about this channel and its viewers. Since monetization support is currently limited, viewer support helps us continue producing new stories each week. If you would like to help, even the price of a small cup of coffee can make a meaningful difference. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/ Quiet Revenge Family, co-fi, https://kyo-fi.com/Vestory PayPal https://www.paypal.com/PayPalMe/Kunhongmin. Thank you for being part of Quiet Revenge. The transition was not seamless. Over the next 3 weeks, the house grew louder, fractured by the friction of two people realizing their safety net had developed a life of its own. Without Martha's constant invisible labor, the domestic machinery began to grind. Dirty dishes accumulated in the sink. Julian had to scramble to find a premium evening babysitter at $40 an hour when he and Clara had a corporate dinner. And the organic groceries began to spoil because nobody had time to prep them. One evening, Martha returned from a woodworking class at the community college to find Julian standing over a boiling pot of pasta, looking frantic while Leo screamed from his high chair. "Mom, thank God," Julian said, throwing his hands up. "Where have you been? The kitchen is a disaster, and Clara is stuck in city traffic." "I was learning how to lathe oak," Martha said, setting her toolkit down by the door. She didn't rush to the crying child. Instead, she walked over to Leo, stroked his hair gently, and handed him a small wooden bird she had sanded smooth. The boy stopped crying, fascinated by the grain of the wood. "We need to talk about the budget, Mom," Julian said, his voice tight with irritation. "The streaming accounts were canceled, and Clara said you refused to chip in for the subscription butcher box this month." "I don't eat beef anymore, Julian," Martha said, pouring herself a glass of water. "And my pension needs to cover my new projects. I'm sure you and Clara can manage the household subscriptions on your own." Julian looked at her, his mouth slightly open. He looked for the guilt that usually lived in her eyes, but found only a calm, clear gray. In early April, a large, slightly faded blue Ford Econoline camper van appeared in the driveway, parked squarely in the spot where Clara usually left her SUV. It was old but immaculate, with new tires and a small solar panel glinting on the roof. Julian found Martha out by the vehicle, checking the oil with a rag. "What is this, Mom?" Julian asked, his voice low, trying to maintain his composure. "The neighbors are going to think we're running a campsite. Where did you even get the money for this?" "I sold Arthur's old fishing boat," Martha said calmly, wiping the dipstick. "It was just sitting in the marina storage, costing me monthly fees. This van has a small stove, a comfortable bed, and excellent mileage." "Are you losing your mind?" Julian whispered, looking around the quiet suburban street. "You're 65. You have a family here. You have a home." "I do have a home," Martha said, looking up at the large shingled house. "But it's very large, and it seems to require a lot of maintenance that doesn't belong to me anymore. I'm driving down to the Blue Ridge Mountains next month. The dogwoods are blooming." Julian rubbed his face with both hands. For the first time, he didn't look angry. He looked small. "We needed you here this summer, Mom. Clara's firm is restructuring. We were counting on you to help with the transition." Martha put the dipstick back and clicked the hood shut. She looked at her son, seeing the little boy who used to scrape his knees, but also seeing the man who had forgotten how to build his own scaffold. "You are very capable, Julian. You and Clara will figure it out. You always do." The true test came on a rainy Tuesday in mid-May. Leo had caught a mild ear infection, keeping Julian and Clara awake for 48 hours straight. The house smelled of sour milk and burnt toast. Clara's laptop sat on the dining table, surrounded by unpaid utility bills and 3 half-empty cups of coffee. Martha was packing her small cooler for her trip the next morning. She was humming a folk tune under her breath. "Can you just stop that?" Clara snapped suddenly, her voice cracking with exhaustion. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her hair knotted, her eyes red-rimmed. "We are drowning here, Martha. We moved in here to save money and build a future, and you are acting like you're a tourist in your own house." Julian walked in from the living room, holding a crying Leo. "Clara, don't," he muttered, though his own face was tight with resentment. "No, Julian, I'm tired of walking on eggshells," Clara said, turning on Martha. "We do everything for this family. We work 80 hours a week. We keep this place alive. And you're locking your door and buying vans like you don't care about your own grandson." Martha stopped packing. She placed a jar of mustard down very precisely on the counter. The room grew incredibly quiet, save for Leo's soft whimpering. She looked at Clara, then at Julian. There was no anger in her face, only a profound, heavy sorrow that made both of them shift uncomfortably. "I love Leo," Martha said, her voice dropping into a register that made Julian instantly recognize his mother from his childhood, the woman who meant exactly what she said. "And I love both of you, but I am not an amenity that came with the real estate. You came here because it was convenient," Martha continued, her voice steady, cutting through the heavy air of the kitchen. "And I let you stay because I was lonely. That was my mistake. I allowed my love to become your convenience." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but Julian put a hand on her arm. He was looking at his mother, really looking at her, perhaps for the first time since his father's funeral. He saw the new lines around her eyes from driving, the faint callus on her thumb, from the woodworking lathe, the independence that looked like a quiet armor. "You don't know my schedule," Martha said softly. "You don't know what I read. You moved your father's picture because it interfered with your whiteboard. You didn't do it because you're cruel, Clara. You did it because you forgot I was a person who lives here, not just a person who helps you live." Clara looked down at the floor, her shoulders dropping. The defensive anger drained out of her, leaving only the raw, naked exhaustion of a young mother trying to hold a complicated life together. "We're just so tired, Martha," Clara whispered, a single tear cutting through the dust on her cheek. "I know you are," Martha said, walking over and gently taking Leo from Julian's arms. The boy nestled into her shoulder, his breathing instantly slowing. "Being tired is part of building a life, but you cannot use my life to pay for yours." She held the child for 10 minutes, letting them breathe in the silence before handing him back to his father. "My trip starts tomorrow at dawn. The keys to the basement are on the hook. Move your office back up here if you need to." Martha left at 5 in the morning while the grass was still silver with frost. The drive south was long filled with the steady hum of the highway and the sweet, resinous smell of old pine trees as she hit the Virginia border. She spent 2 weeks sleeping in the back of the van, waking to the sound of birds she didn't have to identify for anyone else, eating simple meals of cheese and fruit on a folding stool by the river. She didn't call them every day. When she did, the conversations were brief. "Leo's ear is better," Julian said during the second week. His voice sounded different, over the line clearer, less cluttered by the ambient noise of a chaotic house. "We hired a college student for 3 afternoons a week. It's tight financially, but we're managing. We rearranged the living room, put Dad's painting back up." "That's nice, Julian," Martha said, watching the sunset red against the ridges of the mountains. "How are the Q3 numbers?" "They'll be fine," he said. And for the first time in years, he asked, "How is the van holding up, Mom? Is the alternator okay?" "It's perfect," she said. When she returned in late May, the house looked different. The lawn had been mowed not by her, but by a local service Julian had hired. The plastic toys in the living room had been gathered into a neat wicker basket in the corner. The whiteboard was still there, but it had been moved to the small hallway near Julian's desk. Its borders defined its presence contained. The house didn't look like a war zone anymore. It looked like a shared space where people had negotiated their borders. On Sunday evening, the smell of roasted chicken and garlic drifted through the first floor. Martha sat in her armchair by the window, reading her library book. The deadbolt on her bedroom door remained, but the door was wide open, letting the evening breeze circulate through the hall. At 6 o'clock, there was a clear, distinct knock on her open door frame. Julian stood there wearing a clean shirt. He didn't just barge in with a question or a child. He waited until she looked up and nodded. "Dinner's ready, Mom," he said, gesturing toward the dining room. "Clara made that lemon chicken you like." "Thank you, Julian," Martha said, closing her book and placing a linen bookmark between the pages. "I'll be right out." The table was set for 3 adults and 1 toddler. Clara had placed a small vase of wildflowers from the yard next to Martha's plate. The conversation was light, moving from Leo's new words to the traffic on the interstate. Nobody asked Martha to clear the plates. Nobody assumed she would wash the roasting pan. At 7:30, Martha wiped her mouth with her napkin and stood up. "That was wonderful, Clara. Thank you. Are you going to watch the evening news with us?" Clara asked, her voice warm, entirely free of expectation. "No, I have to finish packing my gear," Martha said, smiling as she checked her watch. "The hiking club is doing an early trail clearing up at the gorge tomorrow at 7, and I promised to bring the thermoses." Julian smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression that made him look 34 again. "Don't forget your wool socks, Mom. It's supposed to be damp." "I won't," Martha said, turning toward her room. Behind her, Keitha heard the quiet clink of silverware as her children began to clean their own kitchen together. Dear Quiet Revenge community, we want to sincerely thank everyone who spends time with our stories. This channel was created for people who still value emotional storytelling, life lessons, family bonds, and the quiet strength people carry through difficult times. We believe in being honest with our audience. AI tools may help support parts of the production process, but every story is still thoughtfully selected, edited, checked, and prepared by real people who care deeply about this channel and its viewers. Since monetization support is currently limited, viewer support helps us continue producing new stories each week. If you would like to help, even the price of a small cup of coffee can make a meaningful difference. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family co-fi https://ko-fi.com/the story family PayPal https://www.paypal.com/PayPalme/Kan Huangmin. Thank you for being part of Quiet Revenge.